The letter said my grandmother left me an orchard, but when I arrived, there were no trees, just an empty field and a rusted gate with a lock I didn't have the key for. Before I go any further, hit that subscribe button real quick. Tomorrow, I'm sharing a story that'll completely flip everything you thought you knew about family secrets. I was 21 when the email arrived from a law firm in Oregon, 3 states away from the group home where I'd spent the last decade of my life. Miss Caroline, the director at Riverside House, printed it out for me because I didn't have a laptop, just a phone with a cracked screen that barely held a charge. The email was formal, cold even, explaining that my maternal grandmother, Dorothy Hayes, had passed away 4 months earlier. I'd met her exactly once when I was 6 years old, before my mother died and I entered the foster system. I remembered her as quiet, with hands that smelled like earth and mint, and a sad smile that never quite reached her eyes. According to the lawyer, a man named Richard Foster, my grandmother had left me her property in a small town called Millbrook, Oregon. 20 acres of land, a farmhouse, and something the email specifically mentioned, a private orchard that had been in our family for 4 generations. I stared at those words. Private orchard. Something about the way it was phrased felt intentional, like it meant more than just apple trees or pear trees. But I had no context, no family left to ask, and no idea why a grandmother I barely knew would leave me anything at all. Miss Caroline sat across from me at her desk, watching my face as I processed the information. "This is a good thing, Maya," she said gently. "You age out in 2 months anyway. This gives you somewhere to go, a real fresh start." I wanted to believe her, but fresh starts felt like fairy tales to kids like me. I'd learned not to hope too hard, because disappointment hurt worse than expecting nothing at all. Still, I called the lawyer that afternoon from the group home's office phone, my hands sweating as I dialed the number. Richard Foster had a kind voice, patient and warm, not what I expected from someone who dealt with estates and legal documents. "Maya, I'm glad you reached out. Your grandmother was very specific about her wishes. She wanted you to have the property, but there are some conditions attached." My stomach dropped. Of course there were conditions. Nothing was ever simple. "What kind of conditions?" I asked. "You need to visit the property in person and meet with me to review the full terms of the inheritance. She left a sealed letter for you that can only be opened in my presence, and there are instructions about the orchard that she wanted delivered personally." I had $63 to my name, money I'd saved from a part-time job at a grocery store. A bus ticket to Oregon would cost most of that, leaving me with almost nothing when I arrived. But what choice did I have? This was the only family legacy I had left, the only connection to a past I barely remembered. 2 weeks later, I boarded a Greyhound bus with everything I owned packed into one duffel bag and a backpack. The journey took 32 hours, winding through landscapes that shifted from flat plains to rolling hills to dense forests that seemed to swallow the highway whole. I arrived in Millbrook just after dawn, stepping off the bus into a town that looked like it had been frozen in time. Main Street had maybe 8 buildings, a general store, a diner, a post office, and a few shops with dusty windows and faded signs. The air smelled different here, cleaner somehow, with undertones of pine and something floral I couldn't identify. Richard Foster's office was above the general store, accessed by a narrow staircase on the side of the building. He was older than I expected, maybe in his 70s, with silver hair and glasses perched on the end of his nose. "Maya," he said, standing to shake my hand. "Thank you for making the journey. I know it wasn't easy." He gestured to a chair across from his desk, and I sat, feeling small and out of place in my worn jeans and faded hoodie. "Your grandmother's estate is straightforward," Richard began, pulling out a thick folder. "The property is yours, free and clear. No mortgage, no liens, no complications. The farmhouse needs some work, but it's structurally sound. There's also a savings account she set aside specifically for you, $12,000 to help with repairs and living expenses while you get settled." $12,000. I'd never seen that much money in my life. "But," Richard continued, his expression growing serious, "there's the matter of the orchard." He pulled out an old photograph and slid it across the desk. It showed rows of trees heavy with fruit, their branches creating a canopy of green leaves and golden light. It was beautiful, almost magical looking. "This was taken 30 years ago," Richard said. "Your grandmother's private orchard. It was famous in this region once, produced the most extraordinary fruit anyone had ever tasted. People came from all over Oregon to buy from her." "What happened to it?" I asked, studying the photograph. Richard's expression darkened. "That's where things get complicated. About 15 years ago, your grandmother stopped allowing anyone onto the property. She built a fence around the orchard, put up no trespassing signs, and refused to discuss it with anyone. The local community was confused and hurt. Dorothy had always been generous, sharing her harvest with neighbors and selling at farmers' markets. But suddenly, she shut everyone out. He pulled out another document, this one handwritten on yellowed paper. "This is the letter she left for you. She made me promise not to open it, to only give it to you when you came to claim your inheritance." My hands trembled as I took the envelope. It was thick, several pages at least, sealed with red wax that had her initials pressed into it. I broke the seal carefully and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was shaky but clear, written by someone whose hands had grown unsteady with age. "My dearest Maya," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you found your way here. I'm sorry I wasn't part of your life after your mother passed. The truth is too complicated and painful to explain in a letter, but know that I thought about you every single day. I followed your progress through the foster system the best I could, and I saved everything I had to give you a real chance at life." The letter continued, and my eyes widened as I read the next part. "The orchard is yours now, but it's not what anyone thinks it is. What grows there isn't meant for sale or public consumption. It's special, Maya. Sacred, even. Our family has been guardians of this orchard for over 100 years, and now that responsibility passes to you." I looked up at Richard, confused. "What does she mean, guardians? It's just fruit trees, right?" Richard shook his head slowly. "I've never been allowed on the property to see for myself, but there are rumors in town, stories that have been passed down for generations. Some people say your family's orchard grows fruit that can heal sickness. Others claim the trees only bloom under moonlight. There's even a legend that says the orchard exists in two places at once, that it's connected to something beyond our understanding." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, but his face remained serious. "That's insane," I said. Trees are just trees. Fruit is just fruit. Maybe, Richard agreed. Or maybe your grandmother was protecting something that most people wouldn't understand. Either way, she trusted you to find out. The letter continued with specific instructions. I was to go to the property, find a small wooden box hidden beneath the floorboards in the front bedroom, and inside would be a key and further instructions. Dorothy emphasized that I shouldn't let anyone else into the orchard until I understood what I was protecting. She ended the letter with words that made my throat tight. You are stronger than you know, Maya. You survived things that would have broken most people. This orchard needs someone strong, someone who understands what it means to be alone and to fight for something beautiful. I wish I could be there to guide you, but the orchard will teach you everything you need to know. Trust it. Trust yourself. And remember, some gifts are too precious to share with a world that doesn't know how to honor them. Richard drove me to the property in his old pickup truck, the road narrowing as we left town and wound through dense forest. After about 20 minutes, we turned onto a gravel driveway marked by a weathered wooden sign that simply read, Hayes Property. The farmhouse appeared through the trees, a 2-story structure with white paint peeling in long strips and shutters that hung crooked. It looked abandoned, sad, but there was something solid about it, like it was waiting patiently for someone to bring it back to life. Behind the house, I could see the fence Dorothy had built, tall wooden slats that completely obscured whatever was on the other side. A heavy chain and padlock secured the gate. I'll leave you to explore, Richard said, handing me a set of keys. The larger key is for the house. Call me if you need anything. I'm in town most days. He drove away, leaving me alone with my inheritance. I unlocked the front door, and it swung open with a creak that echoed through the empty interior. The house smelled musty, like old wood and dust and time. But it wasn't unpleasant. Furniture sat draped in white sheets, giving everything a ghostly appearance. I climbed the stairs to the front bedroom exactly as Dorothy's letter had instructed. The floorboards were wide pine, worn smooth by generations of footsteps. I knelt down and began pressing on each board, listening for the hollow sound that would indicate a loose one. Near the window, I found it. The board lifted easily, revealing a small cavity underneath. Inside was a wooden box about the size of a shoebox, its surface carved with intricate patterns of leaves and vines. My heart pounded as I lifted it out and opened the lid. Inside was a brass key on a leather cord, similar to the one I'd found at my other grandmother's farm in the other story, but this one had symbols etched into it that I didn't recognize. Beneath the key was another letter, shorter this time, written in the same shaky handwriting. Maya, this key opens the orchard gate, but before you enter, you must understand what you're walking into. The trees you'll find there are the last of their kind, descended from seeds brought to this land over a century ago by your great-great-grandmother. They don't grow ordinary fruit. What they produce can heal wounds, cure illness, and restore hope to those who've lost it. But the gift comes with a price. The orchard requires a guardian, someone who lives on the property and protects it from those who would exploit its power for profit or personal gain. I sat back on my heels, rereading the words. This couldn't be real. Magical fruit, healing trees. It sounded like a fairy tale. But then I thought about all the strange things in Dorothy's letter, The way she'd locked away the orchard, the rumors Richard had mentioned, the intensity in her written words. What if it was true? What comes next changed everything I thought I knew about my family. Stay with me and make sure you hit that subscribe button. I carried the key downstairs and out the back door, walking slowly toward the tall wooden fence. Up close, I could see that Dorothy had built it herself, probably over many months. The wood was weathered but solid. Each board fitted precisely against the next. The gate was simple but imposing, with the heavy chain wrapped through the handles and secured with a padlock. My new key slid into the lock smoothly, and with a click that seemed too loud in the quiet afternoon, it opened. I unwound the chain, letting it fall to the ground with a metallic rattle, then pushed the gate open. What I saw took my breath away. The orchard wasn't empty at all. It was thriving, impossibly lush and green, despite the fact that no one had tended it for months. But these weren't ordinary fruit trees. The trees themselves seemed to glow with a faint luminescence, their bark silvery white and smooth like birch, but with an inner light that pulsed gently. The leaves were a deeper green than any I'd ever seen, almost emerald, and they moved in a breeze I couldn't feel. And the fruit. The fruit was unlike anything I'd encountered in my life. Some trees bore round fruits that shimmered like opals, shifting through rainbows of color as I walked past. Others had elongated fruits that looked like golden teardrops, hanging heavy from branches that shouldn't have been able to support their weight. Still others produced clusters of small berries that seemed to contain tiny stars, points of light that flickered and swirled inside translucent skin. I stood frozen at the entrance, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. This defied every law of nature I'd ever learned. But it was real. I could smell the fruit, sweet and complex, layers of scent that shifted and changed. I could hear the leaves rustling, a sound like whispered conversations. I could feel something in the air itself, a presence that was both welcoming and watchful. I took a step forward, then another, walking between rows of these impossible trees. There were maybe 20 trees total, arranged in careful rows, with paths of moss-covered stone between them. At the center of the orchard stood a small wooden structure, barely more than a shed, with a door that hung slightly ajar. As I walked deeper into the orchard, I realized something else. I felt different here. The constant ache in my chest, the loneliness and grief I'd carried for years, it didn't disappear, but it felt lighter somehow, like the trees were absorbing some of the weight I'd been carrying. I reached the shed and pushed the door open. Inside was sparse, just a wooden bench, some gardening tools that looked ancient, and a journal lying open on a small table. I recognized Dorothy's handwriting on the journal pages. It was dated from 3 years ago. "The orchard is fading," she'd written. "I'm too old now to give it what it needs. The trees require more than just water and sunlight. They feed on hope, on love, on the belief that beauty and healing still exist in the world. I've been alone too long, and my hope has run dry. I see the light in the fruit dimming, the leaves turning less vibrant. If Maya comes, if she accepts this gift, perhaps she can save them. She's young enough to still believe in impossible things." I sank onto the bench, the journal clutched in my hands. Dorothy hadn't just left me property. She'd left me a responsibility, a dying miracle that only I could save. But how? I was 21 years old with no family, no education beyond high school, and no idea how to care for magical trees that shouldn't even exist. I spent the next 3 hours reading through Dorothy's journal, which documented decades of caring for the orchard. She described how the trees responded to emotion, how they grew stronger when she sang to them, or spent time simply sitting in their presence. She wrote about the fruit she'd given away over the years, how a single piece could heal a sick child or ease an elderly person's pain. But she also wrote about the dangers, people who'd learned about the orchard and tried to exploit it, scientists who wanted to study and dissect the trees, pharmaceutical companies that offered enormous sums of money for access. Dorothy had protected the orchard from all of them, eventually deciding that isolation was the only way to keep it safe. "The orchard doesn't belong to us," she wrote in one entry. "We belong to it. We're caretakers, not owners. And the most important rule is this: the fruit must never be sold or commercialized. It can only be given freely to those who truly need it. The moment profit becomes the motive, the trees will die." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the orchard, I walked among the trees again. Without thinking, I reached out and touched the bark of the nearest tree. It was warm beneath my palm, and I could swear I felt a pulse, like a heartbeat running through the wood. Images flooded my mind, not thoughts exactly, but feelings and impressions. I saw Dorothy as a young woman planting these trees with her own mother. I felt the love and dedication of generations of women in my family who tended this impossible garden. And I understood, with a clarity that bypassed logic entirely, that the orchard had been waiting for me. I was its guardian now, not because I was particularly special or talented, but because I was what remained, the last of the Hayes women, the final link in a chain that stretched back over a century. That night, I slept in the farmhouse for the first time, in the same bedroom where I'd found the key. The windows were open, and through them drifted the scent of the orchard, sweet and complex and alive. I dreamed of the trees, of fruit that glowed like captured sunlight, of women who looked like me tending the garden and singing songs I didn't know but somehow recognized. When I woke, something had shifted inside me. The decision was made, even though I hadn't consciously made it. I was staying. I would learn to care for these trees, to understand their needs, to become the guardian Dorothy had believed I could be. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into learning everything I could. I read every entry in Dorothy's journals, filling in gaps in my knowledge about the orchard's history and needs. I spent hours each day simply sitting among the trees, learning to sense their moods and requirements. And slowly, incredibly, they began to respond. The fruit grew brighter, the leaves more vibrant. The faint glow I'd first noticed strengthened until the entire orchard seemed illuminated by its own inner light, especially at night. I also began to understand the gift Dorothy had left me. The fruit could heal, but it could also comfort and restore. When I ate a piece myself, curious about its effects, I felt the trauma of my childhood in the foster system loosen its grip on my heart. Not erased, never erased, but integrated in a way that made it bearable. Richard visited after about a month, checking to see how I was settling in. I showed him the orchard, unable to keep it secret any longer. He stood at the gate, staring in wonder at the luminous trees. "My God," he whispered, "the legends were true." "You can't tell anyone," I said quickly. "Dorothy spent years protecting this place, and I understand why now. if the wrong people found out? I won't say a word, Richard promised. But Maya, what you have here, it's extraordinary. You could help so many people. I know, I said, and I will, but carefully, the way Dorothy did before she got scared, one person at a time, only those who truly need it. Richard became my first ally, helping me identify people in the community who were suffering from illnesses or injuries that conventional medicine couldn't cure. We were discreet, never advertising, never explaining where the healing came from. A woman named Sarah, who'd been battling cancer, received fruit that turned opal colors under moonlight. Within weeks, her scans came back clear, her doctors baffled by the spontaneous remission. An elderly man named Frank, who'd lost his will to live after his wife died, ate golden teardrops and found himself able to feel joy again, to remember his wife with gratitude instead of crushing grief. A young boy named Tommy, born with a degenerative condition that left him unable to walk, consumed small starry berries over the course of several months and gradually regained the use of his legs. None of them knew the source of their healing. I made sure of that. They thought they were eating specialty fruit from an organic farm. Nothing magical, nothing that would draw unwanted attention. But I knew the truth, and I felt the trees growing stronger with each act of healing, as if giving away their fruit fulfilled some essential purpose in their existence. The orchard taught me more than just horticulture. It taught me about legacy, about the quiet work of caring for something greater than yourself. It taught me that healing comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most powerful gift you can give someone is hope. 6 months after arriving in Millbrook, I finally felt like I'd found my place. The farmhouse was slowly being restored, using the money Dorothy had left me. The orchard thrived under my care, producing fruit more abundantly than it had in years. And I'd built relationships in the community, people who knew me as Maya Hayes, the young woman who'd inherited the old Hayes property and was bringing it back to life. They didn't know about the orchard's true nature, but they sensed something special about the place, something that drew them. Emma from the general store became a close friend, often bringing me supplies and staying for tea. She never asked to see the orchard, respecting the privacy I maintained, but she told me once that being near the property made her feel peaceful in a way she couldn't explain. One evening, as I sat among the trees, watching the sun set through their luminous leaves, I thought about Dorothy and the gift she'd given me. Not just the property or the money, but the purpose, the sense of belonging to something ancient and important. I'd spent my whole life feeling unwanted, like I was a burden that no one chose to carry. But here, in this impossible garden, I was exactly what was needed, not in spite of my difficult past, but because of it. I understood loneliness and suffering in ways that people with easier lives never would. That understanding made me careful about who received fruit, made me value the gift appropriately, made me a worthy guardian. As the years passed, the orchard and I grew together. I learned its rhythms, understood the subtle ways it communicated its needs. The trees taught me patience and humility, lessons I'd never learned anywhere else. I also discovered my own gifts. I could sense illness in people, a subtle wrongness that drew my attention even when they seemed healthy. I learned which fruits would help different conditions, the way the colors and shapes indicated their healing properties. And I found love. Not romantic love, though that came later with a kind botanist named Alex, who accepted the orchard's mystery without trying to unravel it, but love for the work itself, for the privilege of tending something so precious. Dorothy's final gift to me wasn't just an inheritance. It was an identity, a purpose, a reason to believe that my life mattered in fundamental ways. The orchard called me home, and in answering that call, I found everything I'd been missing. Thank you so much for staying with me through Maya's journey. If this story touched something in your heart, please subscribe to the channel. We share stories about finding purpose in unexpected places, about legacy and healing, and the magic that exists when we're open to seeing it. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever discovered something about yourself or your family that completely changed your perspective? What would you do if you inherited something impossible? Your stories matter to this community, and I read every single comment. Now click on one of those videos on your screen. There are 2 more incredible stories waiting for you. See you in the next one.